Good evening. I'm Isaac Ben-Ezra, host and co-producer of Conversations here at ACTV. We know, in addition to the weather patterns that have been so changing as of late, there's also the winds are blowing, and they're not blowing for Tea Party folks necessarily anymore. And there's a new volcano on the horizon that's sending out messages to the whole world. It started in Tunisia, and it's moved on to Egypt and other places. And lo and behold, it's even happening on the streets of Amherst, Massachusetts. And with me today is Ben Groskop and Roger Conant, and they're both members of the local Occupy Wall Street group, and we're going to get a sort of a report on where things stand. It's been quiet lately, but things are happening, and we just may not know about it. So, Roger, why don't you tell us where we are in terms of the national picture?
The national picture. Well, what I know nationally is that Occupy groups are starting up all over the place. We have several in our immediate vicinity, and there's a Occupy group for the state of Massachusetts, and the same thing is happening in many places. So I would say that the focus is now not so much on New York, where the original incident and interest was, but it's spreading out all across the country to Amherst, notably in Northampton and other areas.
Okay, and Ben Groskop, it's always good to see you. Ben is a member of our Amherst Town meeting. Ben, what's happening locally?
Well, Occupy Amherst has been meeting since October 5th, pretty much every Wednesday. We currently meet now in the Bangs Center in Amherst Center, Wednesdays 5 to 7. And these meetings have been a really interesting process of people kind of regularly coming together to talk about building a local organization that can confront the issues of economic injustice, ecological destruction that are going on all around us. And I would say that people have really, in this town, have kind of seen what's happening on a national level, as Roger was describing, and wanting to figure out how to relate ourselves to that broader movement. So I really see what we're trying to do is like build a local organization that can build a political alternative to the systems of neoliberalism and the systems of basically constantly taking people's wealth away, like what you see happening in Greece right now with the outrageous austerity measures that are being leveled against the Greek people. That kind of stuff is all there to serve the upper 1% of income in this society, of wealth in this society, and it is at the expense of the rest of us. And I think that this movement here in Amherst is understanding that there is a class war going on, and it's being waged against us, and it's been a one-sided class war. And we are trying to figure out how to, make that a two-sided class war here in Amherst.
Roger, tell me about your background. What brought you to Occupy Wall Street?
My background in social change efforts goes back to when I was a college student, and became aware that I had been raised in an ordinary middle-class family, isolated from all the issues of social justice and inequity, and I just learned about them. I went to college during the famous 60s, when there was a lot of ferment about the Vietnam War, and I was involved in those efforts and in the civil rights movement to a lesser degree. And for a long time lately, it seems as if there has not been very much social change action going on. There were large efforts to stop the Iraq War when it was about to be undertaken. But despite large demonstrations, which I attended in New York and Washington, nothing happened. The government went on as if they hadn't noticed. So I think people involved in such things got demoralized and very quiet for decades. And the thing that really excites me about this is young people are coming back to life, getting onto the streets, showing big interest in changing our society to make it a more equitable and fairer society. And I just love the fact that this isn't just a movement of a bunch of old gray hairs like me, people who've been at it for a long time, but a lot of people like Ben and college students are really getting into it. This has drawn me in with a notion of optimism that I haven't had for a long time.
Ben, you came from Hampshire College, decided to stay in Amherst, became a member of town meeting. What drew you to Occupy Wall Street?
Well, it's funny. I was out of town in late September, and I came back, and I saw somebody on the street and overheard people talking about Occupy. Meanwhile, I'd been listening and to the news and everything, and having felt like maybe in the last few years I haven't been quite as active politically as I had been a few more years ago, and they said there's going to be a meeting on the Amherst Common, a public meeting, a general assembly about Occupy Amherst. And one of the things that I immediately connected to about that idea was that this is in a public space. I mean, we live in this town. The Amherst Common is a place where, festivals happen there. I mean, anybody can just walk there and participate in something. And it really, to me, I think the basis of building a movement that can provide a political challenge against the kind of obscene income inequality that's going on needs to be an inclusive movement. It needs to be in a space, in a public space, where anybody from the community can come and participate. So, I wasn't involved in the initial call that went out to have this meeting, but I heard it and came and, was very impressed. As Roger was saying, this is one of those kind of activist scenarios where I was seeing people who are both young as well as older. People who were both students as well as living in the community. And it seemed like people were coming to the meeting who were very, suffering that kind of economic dispossession that this economic system creates. And we're talking about it. We're making their personal grievances, their personal struggles, their personal catastrophes sort of made known to the public. And in so doing, that transforms a situation where you think that, your own plight is just your own fault. You lost your job or, had your home foreclosed upon. Well, in American culture, we think of that as being such a, thing that just sort of reflects on someone's individual poor morality or something. And it was so clear, like in this situation, we were coming to see that no, this is created by a system that is rigged against us, that is rigged for us to fail, and we won't accept that. So, it's grown since then, and we've become kind of a more stable group, and we're looking for new people to come and get involved.
And talking about getting involved, you're meeting, as you said, regularly on Wednesdays at the Bank Center at between 5 and 7.
Yeah.
Are you drawing new people all the time? Or is it congealing into a small group of people?
I would say that there's a stable group of around 15 people that come just about every time. But unlike my fears, the group gets larger every week. We had 2 new people last week, and that's typical. There's typically one or 2 new people who hear about us and come to our meeting every week. I should say that in addition to the Wednesday from 5 to 7 meetings in the Bank Center, we're about to initiate a new meeting place Sundays from 3 to 5 at the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House. This will be a 2-hour period in which we will provide an opportunity for discussion of basic issues and perhaps form working groups or affinity groups, not as part of the General Assembly or decision-making format for Occupy Amherst, but as a way to keep wider perspectives available to us. I'm
And-
looking forward to that.
And talking about wider perspectives, I'm getting emails from Northampton and other places all throughout the country, and I'm particularly impressed with the some of the older organizations that have joined with Occupation Wall Street, Jobs for Justice, or With Justice, and other groups like that. And the foreclosure movement has become central in several, not only in Springfield as an issue for Occupy Wall Street, but in New York and other places. You want to talk about that? So there's not
Yeah.
just one issue, but several issues depending on where you live and the concerns that, you know, and let's talk about that.
Springfield No One Leaves is the organization in Springfield that has been organizing to get people who are facing foreclosure. And Springfield, of course, predominantly black population. It's one of the hardest hit by foreclosures in Western Massachusetts. And they have been getting people who are facing this situation again to kind of see that their crisis of like having a foreclosure happen is not simply, their fault, but it is an issue of predatory banks that are trying to, instead of making a deal to allow a family to stay in their home, they are dead set on using the power of foreclosure as an instrument of discipline against these people to, enforce this idea that you have to pay your debt. So I'm very interested in kind of the idea of debt as a concept and how it's kind of playing out in very specific situations. We had a big protest in Springfield led by members of Springfield No One Leaves in November, and we kind of toured all the different places in Springfield where the foreclosure crisis has hit. And we kind of weaved our way and ended up at the Bank of America in downtown Springfield. And a number of people did a civil disobedience action there where they actually sat in and were arrested and pretty much disrupted business as usual at the Bank of America for that day. And many hundreds more of us were outside supporting those inside who were doing that civil disobedience action.
I might comment that that the majority of people affected by foreclosure are whites, but a disproportionate number of people who've been foreclosed are minority populations, like the Hispanic population and the black, because this is not just a black-white issue. This is central to people who are middle class, people who are working class, and the obscene manner in which this whole system was evolved with these phony mortgages, and now attempting to blame the people who accepted these mortgages as somehow, putting their head in the sand, when we know from the number of convictions already. In fact, there's a great article in the Time magazine. This man is busting Wall Street, and it's not just one or two individuals, but they're just beginning to scratch the surface finally. It took them a long time, but there is prosecutions that have been going on, and what we need to see that this is not just an individual or a particular group that have been responsible for the demise of the American economy, but it's systematic to Wall Street generally. That's why it's no secret that Occupy Wall Street has just captured the imagination of so many people.
I mean, the interesting thing about this case where we have a U.S. attorney prosecuting fraud, for example, is that that is kind of one of the things that a lot of people associate with the corruption of Wall Street, and you know how terrible that is. What I would say though is that, you know, one of the bigger problem than what is done that's illegal is what's done on a everyday basis that's legal. I mean, it's legal to put people out on the street who have nowhere else to go. It's legal to, you know, just dispossess people in all sorts of different ways. I think what the Occupy movement in a way has to offer that's changing the political discussion in this country is that, you know, we don't believe in the old system. The old system isn't working for us. The system of capitalism is not working to get people their basic needs, and we can't just keep relying on the same old politicians that serve that system to fix it for us.
Well, what I understand is capitalism is not really being given a chance these days. We don't really have capitalism in its honest form working, because the politicians have been maneuvered by the top 1% to manipulate the laws and change the operation of the system in their favor. If you may have seen Bill Moyer's TV program a few weeks ago, in which he interviewed a couple of people who wrote a book pointing out how the top 1% have manipulated the political system and the laws by in their favor, and we have an unstable feedback loop in which money is being given to Congress to create laws in their favor, and then when that happens, the rich people get richer and reinforce the distortion of the political system. So I think one of the primary objectives of the Occupy movement globally and also locally is to educate people about the extent to which this great concentration of wealth is not an accident. It's not even a consequence of capitalism. It's a consequence of the distortion of the political system by wealthy people.
And I think people have become much more aware about the fact that the system is rigged. I mean, the almost 90% negative reaction to the bailout of the banks was at one moment in time recently, when everybody got the message that we're going to bail out the banks again, but what have we done for the people who were the victims of those banks? And it really disturbs me to think that here we had an opportunity to, instead of allowing for thousands of homes in thousands of communities to go into disrepair and to allow for homelessness, we actually took over the bad debt. We own those houses, but what did we do to keep people in those homes, to keep those communities together, to keep the kids in the schools in those communities? We did nothing about it. We had a perfect opportunity, since we were now the landlord, the owner, to decide whether we want to work for shelters and places to put homeless people, or to temporarily keep people in their own homes until we could work out some kind of a system so that these homes could be refinanced, which they're kind of doing now, but it's little too late. And I think that people don't think in terms of capitalism or anything else. They think in terms of, I think the issue of education is very important. That's why we're having this chat today, because people, you know, if you start arguing about the system sucks, everybody won't disagree with you, but they'll have different reasons for feeling that way.
I think it's true, and I mean, you know, in Occupy meetings, we sometimes do a little triangle when we want to make a process point, and the process point here is that, you know, Occupy Amherst is a variety of different perspectives on what the problems with the economic
But
system
something
are.
brings us together.
There is something that brings us together. I mean, Roger and I work closely, you know, in this group, and you know, and many others do as well. It's one of the reasons why we're having the meeting that Roger referred to, starting up on February 19th, the third Sunday of every month at the Unitarian Society in Amherst, is that we want to have, I think, broader conversations that we don't necessarily have enough time to get into in our regular business meetings, but broader conversations about why we're here, what kind of movement we're trying to build, thinking long-term strategically about, you know, what we're really trying to do. I mean, I would, for example, you know, argue a little differently, I think, than Roger is saying, that, you know, what is driving the sort of super accumulation of capital that we're witnessing right now, with the 1% having, you know, such kind of unprecedented capital accumulation going on, is the system of capitalism itself. That is, the dynamics of profit accumulation necessitate this sort of almost like kind of eating, the body of capitalism is sort of gnawing on itself, and in the process destroying society in order to continue producing more profits for the 1%, and that is done through things like home foreclosures. So meanwhile, a neighborhood is devastated, but banks find ways to make profit on that at every step.
Well, I don't think you'd find any disagreement with the fact that foreclosure is part of the problem today. And when people come to listen to the concerns that are being expressed through Occupy Wall Street, they're usually coming because they're aware that the jobs have dried up, that good jobs have been exported, that it just didn't happen overnight. It's been happening for many years, the whole process. And what we're looking at, and as a time when it's not clear that young people will have the same opportunities that young people had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where there was an opportunity for many people, and opening up finally from some minority participation, not nearly enough, to go to school, to think in terms of there was a progression, that if you worked hard, if you went to school, prepared yourself for the world of business, the world of work, that there would be opportunities, and that being a homeowner was something that was within the reach of the previous generations. And even there, we need to look very carefully at who was excluded while all this prosperity was going on. It was not an even distribution. If there was a distortion, very much dependent on your class, very much dependent on whether you were black, or whether you were Hispanic, or whether you were an immigrant family. And we've always had those issues. Now it's the middle class, the general middle class, that's getting to be the victims. As I said on a previous program, that the middle class is now saying to the unemployed and the people in poverty, move over, we need the space.
So you would think that the middle class, as well as all people of lesser income, would get excited and be out in the streets objecting to the distortion of the culture which is going on, and the distortion of the economy, the distortion of the political system, should be making people upset. And it surprises me that there's not more discontent about this, as Ben put it, this class war which is being waged. What I've heard is there is a class war going on, and we're losing.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and to pick up on Roger's point, I think that the 99% slogan of this Occupy movement is important kind of in the following sense. It's not so much that like everybody in the 99% is virtuous and everyone in the 1% is, you know, full of vice, right? The issue is more that what's unacceptable is having a political and economic system whose primary function is to transfer wealth from the 99% to the 1%.
Yes.
That's what we're objecting to. It's not that all the 99% is united. However, one starts to have to ask questions, like when you're in that sort of middle class to upper middle class sort of upbringing, and that's your background, okay, fine. But, you know, who do you identify with politically? Do you identify with, I don't know, Al Gore, or you know, some other kind of very rich person, Bill Gates? I mean, if you're in that upper kind of, you're not quite 90, you know, not the 1%, but you're like maybe 70s or 80s or whatever, do you identify more with that person who's so much above you? Or do you identify politically more with a person who is, you know, most severely affected by the economic crisis, who's been foreclosed upon, who may be homeless, who may be facing, you know, any number of kind of horrible things that this economy has to dish out? I think that's a choice that people have to start to clarify, because I think that the more that people who are in that sort of middle ground area are able to sort of politically ally themselves with those who are most dispossessed, the more we have a chance of building a trans-class movement that can overturn the system.
Well, I don't know that it's so much a matter of people are deciding what side am I on. I think objectively, when you have kids who graduated from school working for $8 an hour because they can't get employment in the field where they were educated, when you have young people today not being able to, having to come home by the thousands and not have the normal prospect of being able to set up your own pad and think in terms of the life ahead of you, and think in terms of maybe having a family, or the issue of, well, can we have kids today? We're depending on 2 jobs and unemployment is so rampant. How can we afford to have a family? Now, those are issues that are real. People don't abstractly say, which side am I on? They're saying, what is happening to the opportunities that my parents had? Many of the biggest unemployment today is with the people who were last hired. If the percentage rate of unemployment is 10% amongst the white population, it's almost double that today. Mm-hmm. The new black middle class or Hispanic middle class are the first ones on the line to losing their jobs. So it's not only an issue of class struggle, but also the differentiation between people in the classes in terms of how our society deals with the issue of racism.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing that really impressed me about this past fall and the occupations that sprang up in cities all around this country, which I, you know, myself was not that personally directly involved in, but what was really striking to me is actually how this kind of trans-class political identity emerged. I mean to say, like, within the 99%, there's all this gradation of class differentiation, but that people who had full-time jobs were coming to these urban occupations, sleeping there, working together with homeless people who are also sleeping there, working together with traveling activists, and there was just this sense that, I mean, and yeah, that's not just like an abstract idea, like, oh, I'm part of the 99%, you're right, but what it is a specific kind of historical circumstance that we are living through right now that is opening up the possibility of trans-class solidarity to change a system in ways that I don't think it's been seen before. Because frankly, I think a lot of people have kind of like been living on this false dream of the middle class for a long time. They've been thinking, and it's because, as the economist Richard Wolff from UMass points out, I mean, one of the unique things about the American working class in particular is that since from about the 1800s until 1970s, the basic level of income of the working class in the United States has steadily risen. That's not been true of any other working class anywhere else.
Steadily risen.
Steadily risen. And then in 1970s, that started to steadily
Okay.
decline.
It's been
because
stalemate since then.
that, the 1970s, like 1973 is when a lot of historians sort of mark the transition towards what's called neoliberalism, this regime, this economic regime that privatizes everything, that destroys unions, and that reduces public regulation. So we are living through that now, and it's that withdrawal of resources from the working class, because there had been kind of a compromise where the ruling class was saying, sure, we'll pay you good union wages, like certain people of the working class anyway, with all the exclusions that you noted. But now, even that is being taken away, and a lot of people who thought that they had access to this dream of the middle class now realize that it was really just a dream. And I think we're waking up from that dream and realizing that if we're going to survive in a dignified way on this planet, we're going to have to do so together, and we're going to have to do it in a way where we are politically challenging the elites who really control this society.
And Richard Wolff has a very dramatic graph showing how the wages of American workers have stayed steady for about 3 decades, whereas the gross national product and productivity has risen dramatically in those same decades. And whereas what's the difference? The difference is the profits which have gone to the very richest people.
I'm going to, at this point, interrupt to say, give us a web page so that people can pick up on what's going on with the local group.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that since I'm the webmaster of the web page.
It's a great web page. Why don't you do that?
Thank you very much. The website is occupyamherst.com. No spaces, no hyphens, occupyamherst.com. And on this we have a description of our working groups. We have 5 different working groups with different focus of attention. We have a calendar which lists events which are coming up. We have a media page which has become very active lately. It has about a dozen videos and newspaper reports about the recent visit of the Occupy people who came to Northampton and spent 2 days sharing their skills and integrating the Occupies in the region. So I suggest going to the media page, which will provide a lot of information about what's been going on lately.
And the meeting date again?
The what?
The meeting date.
The meeting date is Wednesday from 5 to 7 at the Bang Center, lower level, where a large conference room houses us. So Wednesdays from 5 to 7 at the Bang Center, and then on the 3rd Sundays of every month from 3 to 5 in the afternoon at the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House in Amherst.
Roger, it's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Ben, good job. And that's it for Conversations tonight. In a couple of weeks, we've invited, our next guest will be Congressman Jim McGovern. As you know, because of the legislative changes in terms of districts, he is presently a congressman in the 3rd Congressional District and is now visiting and touring the community and wants to meet people. So in a couple of weeks, we'll have Jim McGovern here, and if you would like to attend that session, get in touch with me by contacting me on my email address, which is isaacbenezra@yahoo.com. And we'll have room for about 20 people, so first come, first serve. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks with Jim McGovern. And I look forward to the opportunity for the community to ask Jim any questions they might have about their concerns about the future. So once again, it's adios. Thank you to the wonderful volunteers from the various schools that represent our college community, and especially to our staff. See you next week. Good night.